you to kind of see what God is doing elsewhere in our community if you don't come up to join us, or if you're not. Well, you could even come Saturday night to church and then still go somewhere else to church on Sunday morning. It's okay. It won't hurt you to do that. You could still do that. Twice a week is not too much. So that's taking place August 12th through 14th. But the big event that's coming up on the horizon is going to be June 27th through July 1st. And that is our annual Vacation Bible School. And we'll be having that here at Mountain Christian Fellowship. It is a sports camp theme. Angela is actively looking for people who would like to volunteer to help out with that. You could volunteer to run an area that students come in groups to you, and then you work with crafts, or you work with a story, or you work with activities outside. Also, that you can volunteer to run a group where you take one age group and you kind of shepherd them through the whole process during that week and be a part of that. You can help with decorating. You can help with setup, takedown. Any part of that you would like to participate in, Angela is looking for volunteers for that. If you do want to volunteer to work with children, we do have a process you need to go through. There's an application to fill out and also a fingerprinting process. So if you'd like to do that, we'd like to get you started on that as soon as possible. But you can talk to Angela Yaden, or if you get our email, because we do have an email list that we often send emails out to. Sometimes they're prayer emails, sometimes they're announcements. Anytime you would like to do a reply to that, and just with a question or something, you can do that, and it comes right back to us, and we'll be able to get back to you and answer that question or forward it on to the person who might need to know that. So also, if you have kids in your neighborhood, kids in your family that might enjoy a week of Vacation Bible School from 9 to noon each day, I encourage you to think about inviting them to participate in that. That's the 27th of June through July 1st. So just so you know, those things are there. I want to tell you about a lady. I love this story because you don't know who this is. Her name is Anna Reeves Jarvis, and you say that name and nobody says, "Oh, she's famous, isn't she?" Actually, most people don't know who she is, outside of maybe West Virginia. But Anna Reeves Jarvis married in 1852, and she and her husband were blessed with 12 children. However, only 4 of them survived to adulthood. And many mothers might have thought, I'm just going to take care of these 4 and focus on that, and I'm not going to bother with anything else. But in fact, she was so struck by that, and the grief was so deep in her loss, that she turned that pain and that loss into active service. It says she took her energies and she began a group called the Mother's Day Clubs. Not a Mother's Day club, but the Mother's Day work clubs. It was about work. They were community groups dedicated to teaching mothers how to provide healthy, sanitary homes, raising funds for children's medications, helping families dealing with tuberculosis, and working to help communities provide safe water sources and sewage disposal. So she started these groups in West Virginia, and they grew from there. And these were mothers that dedicated themselves to trying to create healthier communities and environments for their children and others, and the children of others. She found her comfort in helping other mothers. Also, during the Civil War, West Virginia was a very divided state between North and South. There were families who had soldiers fighting on both sides of that conflict. And when they would come home injured, there weren't hospitals and other places to take care of them. So Anna encouraged the Mother's Day work clubs to become helpers in that process and to lend aid to families who were caring for returned wounded soldiers. But interestingly, she insisted that the Mother's Day clubs, regardless of what town they were in or community they were from, that they'd help soldiers from both sides and not just limit themselves to one. In fact, after the war in 1868, she saw this continued animosity in her state, so she actually decided to organize a Mother's Friendship Day. And they bring together veterans from both sides with their mothers. Her efforts helped many West Virginians reconcile their post-war differences. And you probably, as said, don't remember the name of Anna Reeves Jarvis, but her daughter, Anna Jarvis, is actually a little more well-known because she is recognized as the founder of Mother's Day. I'm always amazed at the resilience of women. I know that Mother's Day can be a tough, tough day for many women. My heart was out to many ladies that I know this last year, lost children or spouses just in this past year, thinking that realizing this is their first Mother's Day, perhaps without somebody, but that's just totally different from normal. I also know a lot of women who have not been able to have children. And so Mother's Day can be a very difficult day for them as well. And so I salute them when they are able to rejoice with those who rejoice. But I think it's also good for us to remember sometimes to weep with those who weep, to consider those who are having challenges today. This last week I was called out on a chaplain call, and a young man was killed in an accident, and my first thought was, oh my goodness, this is his mother's first Mother's Day without him. That's going to mark her week. But women are resilient. They are strong. I've seen women accomplish some amazing things. I love this story about Anna Reeves Jarvis because in the midst of grief and loss, she turned that into something that made a difference for others. She devoted herself to this process of helping other mothers not go through the grief that she endured. But this morning I'm in the series that I have entitled Beyond, and we're looking at encounters that Jesus had with people after his resurrection and what we can learn from those encounters. And of course, we know that Jesus first appeared to women. He first appeared, in fact, to Mary Magdalene. That was the first person who he appeared to. So we're going to talk a little bit about his appearance to the women, and the women particularly who followed Jesus that are named and that we can identify, and some of the things we know about them. Luke 8, verses 1 through 3, if you want to turn there. Today I'm entitling my message, Beyond Expectations. Luke 8 begins with this. After this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household. Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. A lot of people never picture that of these women who followed Jesus, but out of their own means and earnings, they were actually supporting the apostles and Jesus as they traveled. One of the things I noticed as I read through the Gospels is that all of Jesus' interactions with women are positive. We know that he had some confrontational times, all of them with men. Men, leaders, religious leaders. The women that he came across, he often just showed compassion and understanding. Think about it. He would often restore, even restoring to them someone that they had lost, a son or a brother, uplifting them, encouraging them, never casting them down, never criticizing them, bringing healing to them as these women that followed him, delivered from demons, delivered from diseases, protecting them, like the woman who was caught in adultery, who politically he could have easily gone with the crowd and instead had her condemned along with the others who condemned her, but instead he protected her, placing himself actually between her and the crowd and blessing them and their children. Women who brought children to Jesus, and the disciples would have said, no, he doesn't have time for children. And instead, he says, no, let the children come to me, because it was the mothers who brought their children to be blessed. They understood the importance of that. As a pastor and as someone who's seen church finances for many years, I'll tell you, one of the things that I've noticed in a pattern is that some of the most faithful givers are single women. I think they know they've got one real partner working with them. And they are going to be faithful to him regardless. But it's been something I've noticed over the years. It's often impressed me. We know that that there were women who were at the crucifixion. Matthew says that when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." So these are like centurions, guards, soldiers, but who else was there? Many women were there watching from a distance. I just pushed the wrong button. It happens. There we go. Many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. All the way from Galilee, they had followed him as they came down to Jerusalem, all through the challenges that he faced. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joses, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. Mark 15 says, some women were watching from a distance, talking about the crucifixion. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger of Joses, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. John refers to the women who were near the cross. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. At least 3 women that were there that John names right there at the cross. Now, I don't know about you, but when I see something as terrible as the crucifixion, I want to turn away. I don't want that marking my mind. In fact, that's one of the things I've learned working with people who have been through trauma, is that the best thing that I can do sometimes is get them away from the visual that is beginning to mark their minds. In fact, when I go on a call for a trauma as a chaplain, I work to not be taken into that visual aspect of that. There's sometimes almost a morbid curiosity in us to want to see that, but I learned, no, I'm better if I stay back from that because I have more to offer people if I'm not also trying to deal with that. But they are taking this in. These are women who followed him watching the crucifixion. We know that John was there because Jesus spoke to John and assigned him the task of caring for his mother Mary. But we know that these women were there also through that whole process. Probably had witnessed the trial before Pilate and the religious leaders condemning him, hearing the lies that were told about him. Understand, in those days, the only people who would come as to give testimony in a trial like that would be the men. They would have had no place to say anything. On that Sunday morning of his resurrection, there are likely 6 women that were involved in that process. Not all of them are named in all the Gospels. You kind of have to composite to put those together. But Matthew 28:1 says, after the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. Mark 16 says, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. This would have been an expensive outlay for these spices. Mark tells us that an angel actually appointed the women as messengers to the men. Mark says, don't be alarmed, this angel says. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him, but go. Tell his disciples and Peter, he's going on ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. Luke records, when they came back from the tomb, that is the women, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, here's another one mentioned, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. So Luke is indicating that more than 4 women came back from the tomb. John only indicates that it was Mary Magdalene. Then the disciples went back to their homes. So this is Mary Magdalene. This is after John and Peter have run to the tomb. They've looked inside. They've now left and gone back. Who hangs around the tomb? Mary Magdalene. Sticks around. And what is she rewarded with? Mary stood outside the tomb crying, and as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she didn't realize it was Jesus. "Woman," he said, "why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." She's actually proposing that if this person will tell her where they have taken this body, she is putting herself in harm's way and accepting the assignment of somehow physically getting his body back into the tomb out of respect. Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher or master. It's interesting to me that the women were the first to know about the resurrection. And you think, why would that be interesting? In fact, I have a great video, if you ever want to use it. It's called St. John in Exile. And in it, Dean Jones, if you remember The Love Bug, Dean Jones, Disney movies, old Disney movies. I'm not talking the new stuff, but old Disney movies. Dean Jones actually is a one-man performance as John the Apostle on the Isle of Patmos. He does a great job telling these stories about what happened. But he's in his narration, he's talking about the women, and he said, and the women go, "Well, why shouldn't he show us? Why shouldn't he appear to us first? Why shouldn't he?" Well, let me give you a little background. Author Justin Taylor writes this on this topic. He said, "If you were going to make up a story, but you wanted to make it credible, you would not choose women as your first public witnesses in that day." Why? Jewish women could offer testimony in domestic, family, and private matters, but would not function this way as public witnesses or as public spokesmen. The Jewish historian Josephus wrote that even the witness of multiple women was not acceptable, this is, quote, Josephus, because of the levity and boldness of their sex. I didn't write this. This is centuries ago. This guy's dead. Don't worry, he's dead now. Celsus, the 2nd century critic of Christianity, mocked the idea of Mary Magdalene as an alleged resurrection witness, referring to her as a hysterical female deluded by sorcery. Okay, you can be done being mad now. Who were these women? I thought it'd be interesting to take a little bit of a look. We hear their names here and there, but really, who were they? And what were they doing following Jesus? And what were their other connections? Because we kind of just see them in a mass, and sometimes they're just described in this group. And these weren't all of them, but I'm going to talk about 6 women who possibly could have been at the tomb. We know from Luke that there were more than 4. We don't know how many more than 4 that there were. So the passage that I read, talking about those who were with them, of course, names some of them. So I'm going to just go over them. Salome, or Salome, likely the wife of Zebedee. Now, if you remember Zebedee from the Gospels, Zebedee had 2 sons who were followers of Jesus Christ. In fact, they were called the sons of Zebedee, James and John. Well, John is the one who became the author of the Gospel of John, the letters of John, and the book of Revelation. And interestingly, so Salome, who is following, was the wife of a well-to-do fisherman in Galilee. The reason we know he wasn't poor is that he probably had servants, because when his sons got up from their nets and left, he didn't say, "Hey guys, where are you going? What's happening?" But instead, his sons chose to follow. And not only did his sons choose to follow, now his wife has followed Jesus and gone along helping and taking care of some of the logistics and looking out for her sons. In fact, it was Salome who said, "Could one of my sons sit on your right and one on your left?" And interestingly, Jesus doesn't really rebuke her for that, right? It's like he understands her desire to see her sons. But it indicates, too, that she had faith that Jesus was the Messiah and that he was ushering in a new kingdom. So she had come to this place of faith and trust and understood that. So Salome was present at the crucifixion, and we know from the scriptures was present at the empty tomb. Her two sons, James and John, James would actually be the first of the apostles to be martyred. John would be the last survivor of that group. So probably in her lifetime, she saw her son James martyred for the faith that she served. Then there is Joanna, called the wife of Chuza, who was Herod's household manager, somehow high up in Herod's household. It's interesting to me that this wife of someone who was high up in Herod's household was actually a follower of Jesus. And when it says that out of their means they helped support the work, she might have been one of the more well-to-do of that group. But she probably didn't necessarily have her husband's blessing in doing this, but she did follow Christ and found his teaching compelling. And we also know that she was healed or delivered of demons by Jesus' ministry, and so followed for that reason. She was a supporter of Jesus' ministry and among the first to witness the empty tomb, according to the scriptures. Then it gets a little confusing because we have 4 Marys. Mary was one of the most common women's names of the time. And interestingly, Mary is linked back to Miriam and to the term Mara. If you remember, some of you may remember the story of Ruth, and her mother-in-law is named Naomi. But when Naomi comes back to Israel from Moab, where they have been kind of living in a personally imposed exile because Israel had been so bad off, this woman who had lost 2 sons, Naomi, she comes back and they say, well, my name is Naomi, but call me what? Mara, because things have been bitter for me. The idea of bitterness. So these two are linked together. Miriam, who had a kind of a rebellious nature about her, but at the same time turned and served the Lord and was a worship leader under Moses, was Moses' sister, and Mara. So Mary was a very common name, but tied to this root or idea of bitterness. It's possible that name was given because during the time of Jesus, during this first century in Palestine, things were not easy for the Jews. It was a very difficult time. Remember, during Mary's lifetime, after the birth of Christ, what happens to all the baby boys in Bethlehem? Under 2 years old, they're all killed. This is the kind of life that they lived. So it's understandable that perhaps parents would, kind of in preparation for what life might bring their way, think of the bitterness that life could bring in naming their daughters. So 4 Marys. We have Mary, of course, Jesus' mother, who is the widow of Joseph. She's lost her husband. She has other sons and at least 2 daughters, because daughters are used plural and mentioned. One of her sons is James, who will write the book of James, who will actually become the first bishop of Jerusalem, the leader of the church in Jerusalem. James will participate in that council of Jerusalem where the apostles gather together to decide what things the Gentile believers need to do to become Christians. And he is a key part of that because he actually articulates very well what message they need to send out to the others. But he is thoroughly Jewish in his practices, and yet he understands the need for this gospel to go out to the Gentiles. However, James is also martyred and for the faith. He is actually, as legend tells us, James is taken up on top of the temple, where he is called to proclaim to the crowds that Jesus is a farce, that the whole thing was just made up. And instead he refuses to do that, and he is proclaiming the greatness of Christ, who was his brother or half-brother by Mary, and they throw him off the temple out into the street, where he doesn't die upon landing, but then he is struck and killed later in the street. So her son also, James, would perish. along with Jesus, who she had lost. She is there for the crucifixion, and she witnesses also the burial. We don't know whether she was at the resurrection or not, or on that first Sunday morning. It makes sense to me that she might have been one of the first ones up in the morning to make sure that the men who took care of this did the job properly. There's Mary, who is the sister-in-law of Mary. So, because we sometimes read, well, there was Mary who's the sister of Mary. It doesn't make sense that you're going to have Mary and my sister Mary. But actually was likely a sister-in-law. Church tradition and historians tell us that Mary, who was the wife of Clopas, actually Clopas being the brother of Jesus' father Joseph. So she is a part of Mary's family, and she is present, one of those present at the crucifixion, probably there supporting Mary and being there with her. Clopas, her husband, is believed to be one of the two that was on the walk to Emmaus. And in fact, he already knew that the women had said this crazy thing about Jesus having been resurrected. So she witnessed the crucifixion. We do not know whether she was at the empty tomb or not. Then there is Mary Magdalene. She probably the most storied of the women of the New Testament. More pictures have been painted of her, probably other than Mary, the Virgin Mary. So many pictures of Mary Magdalene depicting who she was or what she was like or what she did. And she's been cast in the role of a prostitute. Perhaps she was the one who came and anointed Jesus' feet. She's often depicted as that woman of ill repute who came and did that, but we don't know that that was what she did. But one of the things that I find impressive about Mary is you see her listed in every account. She is the one Mary that we know was there at the crucifixion. We know she was there at the burial. She is named by name. We know that she went to the tomb. In fact, as I said before, John names her alone as going to the tomb on that Sunday morning. So she continued to pursue that. What strikes me about that is that the disciples, they had pretty well scattered. Jesus said, you strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. Did that happen with the women? No. They were still together. They were still hanging out. They had followed all the way through this process. They had even made a determination. As soon as we can on Sunday morning, as soon as the week dawns, we're going to go down there and we're going to make sure that this was done properly and that he was properly taken care of. Somebody shouldn't have this done by strangers in their mind. This should be somebody who's devoted to this person, who loves them. We're going to go down there and make sure. They didn't go down to find an empty tomb. They didn't go down in fact, they're thinking, who's going to roll this stone away so we can get in there and take care of business? I love the idea that Mary was so devoted to Christ that he appeared to her first. Nothing happens by accident in the Gospels. Nothing happens by accident. The disciples aren't out on the Sea of Galilee and a storm comes up just because there's bad weather. It didn't just happen. Jesus didn't go, oh, this was a poor time for them to try to get across the lake. Look what I've got to do now. When Jesus calmed the storm and he was asleep in the boat, do you think it's because it surprised him that there was a storm? All set up. Every aspect of what we read in the Gospels is managed to teach us a lesson and to take something from. So it's not an accident that John and Peter have run back and scattered, because who knows who's going to come and investigate here at the tomb. Who knows what trouble we could get into. They're going to accuse us of stealing his body. We've got to get out of here now. And who's there? Mary, weeping at the tomb, grieving over this loss and wondering what's taking place. In fact, Jesus comes to meet with her and she doesn't even recognize him, possibly the tears blurring her eyes so much she doesn't recognize who this is, thinks this is just somebody around. Just take me where you've got him and I'll bring him back here myself if I have to. And make sure this is done correctly. I love her example of devotion in the midst of turmoil. In the midst of such loss, in the midst of such trouble and such confusion, she is devoted to this process. Beyond expectation. You know what's expected from us? Our duty, right? Most of you know what's expected. You get up in the morning and you know what's expected, right? Maybe you've got work you've got to get to. Maybe you've got kids you've got to get up to get to school. Maybe you've got things you've got to do. Whatever it is, you know you've got expectations on you. And it is your duty to meet those expectations. Maybe you've got a job and you know what those expectations are and you meet those expectations. And oftentimes that's the life we live in, is the life of duty and meeting expectations, because we don't want to let people down, right? Or we don't want to be seen sometimes as that kind of person who lets somebody down. You comb your kids' hair before they head off to school, not because you think they need their hair combed, but you know you don't want anybody to see them without their hair combed. It's duty. It's an expectation. If they weren't going anywhere where anybody's going to see them, are you going to comb their hair? No way. No way. They'll just be however they happen to be, right? Put a higher fence in the backyard. Who cares? We're just, let them run around in whatever. I don't care. Matching clothes, doesn't matter. But duty, expectation. And what I find interesting is that I think men tend to live pretty easily in the idea of duty and expectation. They have a sense of what they're supposed to do. A man's got to do what? What a man's got to do. But you know what I find beyond expectation? What I find beyond duty? What I see reflected in the lives of these women is devotion. And I think we are all called to a place beyond duty and beyond expectation, a place of devotion. Because devotion goes beyond what's expected. How do you tell the difference between duty and devotion? One of the ways is devotion doesn't care who's looking. Duty, it's kind of like, hey, did somebody notice I got that done? Did somebody notice this was done? Duty goes beyond whether somebody is looking or not. It doesn't care. Devotion goes beyond whether somebody's looking or not. Duty kind of stops at where somebody keeps track. Devotion doesn't need anybody to check on its work. Doesn't need anybody to check. They realized that whoever wrapped Jesus' body and got him ready, because they watched the burial, they knew it. They knew that whoever had done that did it out of duty. They came back to do it in devotion. There's another level. And I really believe that women understand that often better than men do. When I watch my wife wrap Christmas presents, don't they already know what they're getting? But I want it to look nice. Okay. Taking a lot of time there with that. More wrapping paper you need me to get down? More bows? More stuff? They're just going to tear that stuff off. See, I get you what you want. That's what's expected. A woman goes beyond the expectation to devotion. I want them to know that I love them. I want them to know how much I care. If anybody's going to think about sending someone flowers or a card or something special on a particular occasion, it's probably not going to be me. It's going to be my wife, Tina. She's going to say, shouldn't we do this? Have you thought about that? Oh, yeah, okay. Beyond duty is devotion. Devotion doesn't care who's looking. Devotion doesn't need anybody to check on its work. Devotion doesn't care who else shows up. Doesn't care who else shows up. Devotion just shows up. But what if nobody goes with me? I'll be there. Mary, you going to haul this body back here by yourself, all anointed with spices and stuff? If I have to, I will. If nobody goes with me, I will. That's devotion. If nobody else joins me for prayer, I'm going to pray. You know, we have a prayer group. We get together by Zoom on Sunday afternoons, and somebody said, well, how many people come? And I said, I really don't care. I really don't care. I don't care if it's 3, I don't care if it's 10, I don't care if it's 12. It's not about a meeting, it's about prayer. And I know where 2 or 3 are gathered, Jesus shows up, and that makes a majority anytime. But that's another thing I find about women, is they understand that sometimes they might be the only one, and yet they still get it done. With resilience, with strength, with character, they get it done. My mom spent 23 years taking care of my disabled father till he passed away at the age of 70. I asked her one time, I said, Mom, I just complimented her. I said, Mom, I'm just always impressed with how well you do taking care of Dad. And you know what she said? She said, well, if I didn't do it, you boys would have to. So if I have to do it by myself, the hardest thing we had to do was the day that we had to help her understand that she could no longer take care of him by herself at home. That he needed to be in a facility where they could really care for him. His physical needs had gotten to that place. That was one of the toughest things for her. Why? She had met her duty. She had met her obligations. Nothing more was expected, but because devotion was built into her. I believe that Anna Reeves Jarvis could have stopped, could have just mourned the loss of 8 children, and everybody would have just shaken their heads and said, poor Anna Reeves Jarvis. Instead, she devoted herself to the health and welfare of other people's children. She went beyond duty, beyond expectation. See, that's what impresses me about women. That's why I think Jesus was especially careful to lift up and encourage the women around him. Because he knew they didn't need corrected. They just needed to be loved. They needed to be encouraged and lifted up. Why were they called as the witnesses to his resurrection? Why not? They'd been there the whole time. They'd walked through the whole process. Why not? Would you stand with me as we close this morning? Father, I want to thank you for the strong ladies in our lives. Ladies who move beyond expectation, beyond duty, to devotion. For us, for their children, for their church, for their community. They don't care who's looking. They don't care who shows up. And there's no need to check on their work because they're devoted. I pray that all of us would follow that example, going beyond what's expected and serving instead out of love. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. God bless you this morning, and pray you have a blessed rest of your Mother's Day.